Chinese GPU players seem to be less competitive in the global market. What essential ingredients, if you may, should be added to catch up with world's leading manufacturers?
It's really difficult. And the Chinese government is making lots of funding available to help companies get started and go forth. And there's been a lot of announcements lately. There's, I think, 6 new startups in China that are making GPUs. But you got to remember that statement I made about 20 years, and it's actually even longer than that. It takes time, it takes experience, and it takes bulk, it takes size. If you compare the Chinese startups to AMD, Intel, and NVIDIA, AMD has 16,000 people. Intel has 121,000 people. NVIDIA has 22,000 people. And you're going to compare that to a startup in China that's got 200 or maybe 300 people? That's crazy. There's no comparison. Now, that's not to say that Chinese startups don't have a chance. They do, because the Chinese startups have something that AMD, NVIDIA, and Intel never had, which is they have a huge home economy. And that home economy, the people in China want to buy Chinese parts. They really want to do that and help their country and help the companies in their country. So the Chinese companies will grow and they'll get bigger and they'll get more and more technology. And one day they'll be big enough to reach outside of China and be a competitor that AMD and NVIDIA and Intel are going to be concerned about. But that's going to take time. To get from 300 people to 120,000 people, you got to sell a lot of stuff. I certainly haven't met everybody at all those companies, but over the 40 years that I've been doing this, I've met a lot of people at those companies, and I have never met one that wasn't, in my opinion, close to genius. I mean, those 3 companies have collected the smartest people I have ever met. I mean, it's just extraordinary how clever they are.
So I heard you just finished a book on the history of GPU. Would you like to share more details with us?
Yes, I've written several books, and this was the hardest one I ever wrote. It took 2.5 years. Hopefully, fingers crossed, it'll be out on the shelves this fall, maybe a little bit after fall. It's a big book is the problem. It's 1,200 pages. So it's going to take a little while to get that printed. The book traces the history of the GPU, and that history, believe it or not, goes all the way back to 1960. That's when the concepts for a GPU were starting to formulate. But back in those days, they were in huge boxes like this, right? Now it's in the tiny little chip, and it's a bazillion times better than those huge boxes were. I just did a webinar last Wednesday on the early history of the GPU. We talked about this history. It's amazing to hear the stories that those designers and developers were problems they were trying to solve in 1970 and 1980. And the problems are not dissimilar from what we have today. The difference was in those days, they could actually see the circuits. They were that big. Now you have no idea what the circuits look like because they're crammed into this little piece of silicon with 50 billion companions.